Welcome to a deep dive into the engineering of SpaceX's Starship program. You've sent over some really interesting stuff, articles, even a whole technical presentation. So I can tell you're really interested in how this thing is changing how we think about space travel.
Well, SpaceX is really ambitious, They want to make space travel more like, regular aviation, something that's reusable, reliable, and eventually just routine.
Yeah. Like no more of this business of just throwing away rockets after one use, right?
Exactly.
Both Elton Chang and Solomon Gugu, they both talk about this in the articles you sent. Reusability is like the core of SpaceX's whole vision. It's not just some like nice extra,
Yeah, and Starship really takes it all to a whole new level. I mean, SpaceX made reusable rockets, practical with Falcon 9, but Starship and that super heavy booster, those are designed from the ground up to be fully reusable and rapidly reusable too. Think like turnaround times you expect with airplanes.
Man, that changes everything. Gugu even calls traditional rockets single use, which is kind of crazy when you actually stop and think about it. Can you imagine the cost savings if we could refuel and relaunch rockets the same way we do with like a jet?
Oh, absolutely. It's a completely different way of thinking compared to how the space industry has always done things. SpaceX is basically saying, we're all in on reusability to make space travel cheaper and easier to get to.
And speaking of going all in, let's talk about how Starship is actually built. I took a deep dive into that SpaceX Starship system presentation, and I got to say, something really surprised me. They're using stainless steel. I was expecting, I don't know, some super high-tech top secret alloy or something.
That's SpaceX for you, always zigging when you think they're going to zag. See, everyone just assumes carbon fiber is the only way to build a spacecraft. And sure, it's light, it's strong, but the presentation makes a really good point about cost. Stainless steel is 67 times cheaper than carbon composites.
Okay, wait, hold on. 67 times. That's insane. But isn't carbon fiber, like, better suited for space?
It's not that simple. Yeah, carbon fiber is lighter, but stainless steel is tough. It can handle extreme temperatures way better. Think about re-entry that's like flying through a blowtorch. Carbon fiber wouldn't stand a chance. But stainless steel, it can take the heat. Plus, it's easier to repair and maintain.
So it's like, instead of a fancy nonstick pan, you're going with a cast iron skillet. Maybe not as flashy, but it gets the job done and lasts forever. Practicality over flashiness. But even with the best materials, you still need some serious muscle to get this thing off the ground. Right. Which brings us to the heart of Starship, the Raptor engines.
Ah, yes, the Raptor engines. This is where SpaceX's engineering really gets interesting.
The presentation went deep, really deep into the technical stuff. And honestly, I'll admit some of it went over my head. But I think I got the basic idea. Fuel plus oxidizer, mix them together, boom, thrust.
You got it. In this case, the fuel is methane and the oxidizer is liquid oxygen, or LOX for short.
Wait a minute, methane. Like the stuff we're trying to reduce here on Earth.
The one and only. It sounds weird, but it actually has some big advantages for Mars missions. For one, it's pretty easy to come by, and there's even the potential to make it right there on Mars, something called in situ resource utilization, or ISRU.
Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me. ISRU?
Sure. Basically, ISRU means using what you find on Mars to support your mission. In this case, we could be talking about creating methane fuel on Mars itself for the return trip back to Earth. How cool is that?
Wow. Making rocket fuel on another planet. That's just mind-blowing. But let's get back to the engine itself for a sec. The presentation kept mentioning this full flow staged combustion cycle. And to be honest, it sounded kind of like something out of Star Trek,
It does sound pretty complicated, right? But it's a really smart way to burn fuel. Imagine a furnace with multiple stages instead of just one fire. The whole idea is to control how the combustion happens so you get the most energy possible.
So instead of one big explosion, it's more like a bunch of smaller controlled burns.
Yeah, you got it. And because the Raptor burns almost all of its fuel in these controlled stages, it's super efficient and creates a ton of thrust.
Okay, so we've got this super efficient engine, but even with all that efficiency, you still need a lot of raw power to actually break free of Earth's gravity. And that's where super heavy comes in, and this thing is a beast.
No kidding. Super heavy is something else. The presentation actually said that it can create over 16.7 million pounds of thrust.
Okay, but what does that even mean? Like, how can I even wrap my head around a number that big?
Well, imagine 150 Boeing 747s taking off at the exact same time. We're talking about that much force.
Whoa, okay, that's just mind-blowing. And you need all of that power just to lift Starship off the ground.
That's right. Super Heavy does all the really heavy lifting, getting Starship up and out of the Earth's atmosphere. Then, and this is the cool part, it actually does this controlled descent and lands back on Earth, all ready to go for another launch.
Speaking of landing, I got to ask you about this controlled belly flop thing that Solomon Gugu was talking about in his article. Using flaps for aerodynamic control during descent, it just sounds kind of scary, to be honest.
It's definitely a bold move, no doubt about it. See, unlike Falcon 9, which uses landing legs, Starship has those flaps, and they control how fast and at what angle it comes down. It creates drag, almost like a skydiver, and then just before touchdown, the engines fire up again for that nice soft landing.
Man, it's really incredible how SpaceX keeps pushing the limits of what we thought was even possible. But landing's only half of the battle, right? What about coming back into the atmosphere, re-entry? Coming in from space at those speeds, it's got to be like flying through a furnace.
Yeah, re-entry is definitely one of the toughest parts of spaceflight. To deal with all that heat from friction, Starship is covered in, get this, thousands of these heat shield tiles, especially on the bottom.
The presentation mentioned these tiles were made out of some special kind of ceramic. What's so special about it?
Well, these things have to withstand temperatures of up to 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt steel. Plus, they have this cool hexagonal shape that keeps any cracks from spreading, sort of like a honeycomb, you know?
So like a suit of armor made of these tiny heat-resistant scales. That's seriously impressive engineering. And they're reusable too, right?
That's the plan. They're designed to survive multiple re-entries, which obviously helps to keep costs down. And it's good for the environment, too.
Okay, so we talked about getting Starship into space, bringing it back down to Earth, even protecting it from the heat of re-entry. But what about its purpose? Like, what can it actually carry?
Well, Starship's payload bay is massive. I mean, we're talking about the potential to transport something like 100 people all the way to Mars, plus all the supplies they would need to survive.
100 people? That's like sending a small village to another planet. How does that even work from a design standpoint?
So SpaceX is developing different versions of Starship, each one fine-tuned for a specific job. For cargo missions, there's this giant door that opens up to reveal the entire payload bay. Think of it like a giant clamshell opening up in space.
I'm trying to picture it. That's wild. So different doors for different purposes. What about if you're carrying people?
Well, for crewed missions, there's this pressurized section just for the crew with everything you need for deep space travel, life support, sleeping quarters, even a viewing gallery. Can you imagine the view of Earth from up there?
Man, sign me up. Okay, but let's bring things back down to Earth for a second. Where does SpaceX even build and test these Starship prototypes?
That all happens down in Boca Chica, Texas, at a place called Starbase. It's basically SpaceX's own dedicated Starship development and testing site. They call it a spaceport of the future, and it pretty much is.
And I remember the presentation showing pictures of this massive launch tower. What's the story with that?
Ugh. That's no ordinary tower. That thing is designed to catch returning super heavy boosters using these, giant robotic arms. It's like a catcher's mitt, but for a rocket that's taller than the Statue of Liberty.
Hold on, wait. A giant robot catching a rocket. That's like straight out of a sci-fi movie. But it's actually happening.
Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah, it's quite the sight. Starbase also has a dedicated landing pad just for Starship. It's a busy place, that's for sure. They're really pushing the limits of what's possible down there.
But all this innovation, it can't be easy. The presentation mentioned something about, some local concerns about Starbase's environmental impact.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that even with something as ambitious as this, we got to be mindful of the effects it has on the environment and the people who live there. Balancing progress and responsibility, that's the key.
Absolutely. And, speaking of pushing the limits, we've got to circle back to the heart of it all. The Raptor engine. I gotta admit, I'm still wrapping my head around this whole full-flow staged combustion cycle thing.
It's definitely a mouthful. Tell you what, let's try a different analogy. Think of a traditional rocket engine, like a sprint. You mix all the fuel and oxidizer in one go, get a quick, powerful burst, and you're done.
Okay, so a traditional engine is like that quick burst, that sprint. What makes the Raptor engine more like the marathon runner here?
Well, it all comes down to control and efficiency. See, instead of one massive explosion, the Raptor uses this staged combustion. It's kind of like, imagine a fireplace, but instead of one big log, you've got two smaller logs burning side by side. Those are like the Raptor's pre-burners.
Two logs, got it.
Right, so these pre-burners, they burn a little bit of the methane and liquid oxygen, and that creates this really hot, high-pressure gas.
Okay, so we've got these two, like, mini fires going. Then what? What do we do with all that hot gas?
Well, here's the really clever part. That hot gas doesn't just escape. It actually spins turbines. And those turbines, they power pumps that force even more methane and liquid oxygen into the main combustion chamber.
So you're saying it uses the heat from those initial logs, those pre-burners, to basically power a system that feeds the main fire.
Yeah.
That's like a chain reaction of efficiency.
You got it. And because it's using almost all of the fuel and oxidizer in this super controlled way, it squeezes out every last bit of energy, which is why it's so efficient.
Wow, that's amazing. So it's not just about raw power, it's about using that power as smartly as possible.
Yeah.
No wonder they think these engines can be used 1,000 times.
Exactly. And don't forget, these engines have to withstand insane temperatures and pressures, and they have to do it over and over again. It's really incredible when you think about the engineering that goes into it.
Well, I feel like we've gone from like the drawing board to the launch pad with this thing. We talked about the stainless steel, the crazy powerful Raptor engines, that wild belly flop landing, even the challenges of building, a spaceport of the future.
It's been quite a deep dive. But the most exciting part for me is how Starship is changing how we even think about space travel. It's not just about getting to Mars, it's about making space accessible, making it sustainable, and turning it into a place we can actually explore.
Yeah, it's like taking something straight out of science fiction and making it real.
Yeah.
And with like the sheer size of Starship's payload, we're not just talking about sending astronauts anymore. We could be sending scientists, engineers, maybe even artists, teachers. Who knows?
Imagine the things we could discover, the things we could create if we could really expand beyond Earth.
The possibilities are really endless, and Starship is leading the way.
And as we've seen, it's all thanks to some truly groundbreaking engineering.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into SpaceX's Starship program. Hopefully you're feeling, a little bit mind blown, and maybe you even learned a thing or two about what it takes to push the boundaries of human exploration.
And hey, who knows? Maybe one day we'll get to experience space travel ourselves, thanks to incredible feats of engineering just like this.
Until then, keep looking up and never stop asking questions. This is just the beginning of an amazing adventure. Thanks for joining us.